Today we are going to learn the easiest and most useful way to graph lines. And this is by using what we call slope-intercept form. Now in that little box it tells you what slope-intercept form is, but I'm going to write something off here out to the side. Slope-intercept form, the number one rule is it has to be in y equals. Has to be y all by itself on one side of the equation. Once you get y on one side of the equation all by itself, you're going to look for the coefficient in front of x. Whatever that number is, that's your slope, or your m, which is what we learned about yesterday. So that's the one important thing. The coefficient in front of x is your slope. Now, the number that you add to the end, which is what we call b most of the time, that is your y-intercept, which is what we talked about earlier this week whenever we first started graphing lines. So what we can do is we can use the slope and the y-intercept to graph a line. So what we want to do over here off to the side, let's write some steps. So if we want to graph a line using slope-intercept form, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure the equation is in the form y equals mx plus b. So we'll just kind of simplify that. Make sure the equation is in y equals mx plus b. Okay, once you're sure that the equation is in y equals, then we are going to plot the y-intercept. Okay, now the y-intercept, remember we just mentioned this, that's going to be that number that's added to the end of your equation. As a point, it's going to be 0, b, and you'll kind of see what this will look like once we get into some examples. Okay, I need 2 points to draw a line. I have my y-intercept. So to get my second point, we are going to use the slope to plot the second point. And remember from yesterday, slope is rise over run. Okay, I know this is just a lot of talk. It'll make more sense once we get into some examples. So we are going to do 6 of these. So the directions are going to say, identify the slope and the y-intercept of the line with the given equation. Then we're going to use just the slope and the y-intercept to graph the equation. So the first line that we want to graph is y equals x minus 4. Okay, number one rule, and the first thing that we always need to check for, is it in y equals? I noticed I have y all by itself on one side of the equal sign, so step 1 is done for me. I can move on to step 2. Now before I move on to step 2, what I like to do, and what the directions actually tell you to do, is to go ahead and identify your slope and your y-intercept. Now you could write out slope, you could write out y-intercept, but m is the letter or the variable that we use to represent slope, and b is the letter that we use to represent y-intercept. So we can write m equals b equals. So m for my slope, remember, my slope is the coefficient in front of x. So if I look at x, my coefficient, the number in front of x, I don't see one. Hopefully you remember that if you don't see a number, it's a 1. So my slope of this line is 1. Or it's going to actually be handy to write it as a fraction. 1 as a fraction is 1 over 1. And if we interpret this as slope, it means I'm going to rise 1, run 1. Okay, my y-intercept is that number on the end. Now if you look at the number on your end, it's a 4, but it's a minus 4, so we're going to carry that sign down with it. So my y-intercept is negative 4, or as a point is 0, negative 4. So moving on to step 2, I need to plot my y-intercept. Okay, well my y-intercept is at negative 4. So I have 1 point. To find my second point, I'm going to use my slope to plot that second point. Now the number one, or the very important thing to remember here, is from my y-intercept, I'm going to use my slope. So starting at my y-intercept, my slope tells me I need to rise 1, run 1. So once you rise 1, run 1, you plot your second point, you can connect your points, and you have your line. So this is a much simpler and much easier and much more useful way than finding the x and the y-intercepts or even making a table. Okay, let's try y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. First thing we always need to check for, is it in y equals? Okay, yes it is. Once we verify that it's in y equals, I can identify my slope and my y-intercept. So starting with my slope, or m, it's my coefficient in front of x. So if you look at x, the number in front is a negative 2/3. So if we want to interpret this as a slope, we're going to say we will rise -2, run 3. My y-intercept is a +4, so we can just call it a 4, or as a point would be 0, 4. Okay, well we're going to start by plotting my y-intercept. So we're going to go up to 0, 4, plot my first point. To get my second point, I'm going to use my slope. Now this time my slope tells me I'm going to rise -2. Well, to rise -2, that means I need to go down 2 units. So I'm going to go down 2, and then I need to run 3. So from my y-intercept, I'm going to rise -2, run a +3, and plot my second point. So notice this line, it has a negative slope if you look at it, and if you verify that with your slope, it was a negative number, so it matches. Okay, let's try one more, or a couple more. Y equals -x plus 1. Okay, is it in y equals? Well, it sure is. Y is all by itself, so I can identify my slope and my y-intercept. When I'm looking for my slope, once again I notice that there is there's no coefficient in front of x, so it's a 1, but this is also a negative x, so my slope is going to be a -1, or a -1/1, and interpreting this as slope, we're going to rise -1, run 1. My y-intercept is at 1, or at 0, 1. Okay, so to plot this line, the first thing we're going to do is go up to my y-intercept, and we're going to plot it at 0, 1. To plot my second point, use your slope, and from your y-intercept, this time we are going to rise -1, run 1. Plot your second point. We can connect them, and we have a line. Okay, let's try 3x minus 2y equals 6. Okay, the first thing we check for is in y equals. Okay, well this time it's not in y equals, so the first thing that we have to do is put it into y equals. So if I want to solve for y, I need to get rid of this 3x first. So to get rid of that 3x, I need to subtract 3x from both sides. So I get -2y equals -3x plus 6. Now if you wanted to say 6 minus 3x instead, it would mean the same thing. I prefer to put the x first because it kind of matches my slope-intercept form. Do whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, then to finally solve for y, I have to divide by a -2. Now whenever I divide by a -2, I don't only have to divide both sides by a -2, but on that right-hand side, I have to divide each piece by a -2. So I end up with y equals 3/2 x minus 3. Once I have it in y equals, I can identify my slope and my y-intercept. So I want you guys to go ahead, pause the video, identify your slope and your y-intercept, and graph your line. Okay, hopefully your line looks very similar to the one I have drawn there. If not, double check, maybe see what you did wrong. Okay, 2 more. Let's do y equals 4x. Okay, first thing we check for, is it in y equals? We notice that yes it is. So looking for my slope, the coefficient in front of x is 4. Or if we write this as a fraction, it would be 4/1, which means we are going to rise 4, run 1. Now my y-intercept is the number that I'm adding to the end. I don't see a number added to the end, so the only thing that I can add to the end that wouldn't change the equation would be a 0. So my y-intercept is actually going to be 0, or 0, 0, which is at the origin. So to plot this point, my y-intercept just starts at my origin. From my y-intercept, my slope tells me to rise 4, run 1. Plot my second point, connect them together, and you have your line. Okay, one more, and this one's going to take a little bit of work. Let's do 6x plus 3y equals 9. Okay, I want you to pause the video. You hopefully notice that it is not in y equals, so I want you to do that first. But before you go on and graph your line, unpause the video, make sure your equation matches mine. Okay, whenever you solve for y, your equation should look like y equals negative 2x plus 3. If your equation matches that, go ahead and identify your slope and your y-intercept, graph your line. So go ahead and do those and pause the video. Alright, well hopefully your line looks like mine. Notice that my slope was a negative number, so you should have expected my line to slope down, which it does.